Ever wonder about the fate of families tied to Nazi Germany? Most were shattered after 1945, but one did something unexpected. The field marshal's son deserted the army, befriended his father's enemies, and made a choice in 1977 that stunned many. This decision makes sense knowing how his father truly died. It was a lie that saved a family. What was this controversial choice? Millions annually pass through an airport named Rommel, not after the Nazi field marshal, but his son. Because while most families linked to the Third Reich faced ruin post-1945, the Rommel family pursued a path no one anticipated. The field marshal's teenage son left the Wehrmacht, connected with the children of his father's chief adversaries, and reached a 1977 decision so debated it almost ended his career. A decision that only becomes clear when you understand his father's real demise. The deception that protected a family. October 14, 1944. A 15-year-old named Manfred observed from an upstairs window as two generals exited a vehicle and approached the front door. They certainly weren't there for social reasons. Downstairs, his father, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, Germany's most renowned soldier, already grasped their purpose. The regime had implicated Rommel in the July 20th plot, the unsuccessful assassination attempt against Hitler just 3 months prior. The proof was weak, largely derived from the confessions of co-conspirators potentially naming Rommel under duress. However, in the Third Reich, mere suspicion sufficed. The generals presented Rommel with two options. The first involved a trial before the People's Court, overseen by the zealous Roland Freisler. A public spectacle leading to execution and the potential arrest, imprisonment, or worse for Lucy and Manfred. The regime would confiscate everything from the family, their reputation, their financial support, their security. The second option was a capsule of cyanide. Take it immediately. The official account would then state Rommel passed away from wounds sustained during an Allied air raid months before. He would receive a state funeral with full military honors. Lucy would retain her pension. Manfred would be left to fend for himself. Rommel chose the capsule. He bid farewell to his wife. He informed Manfred of the situation, stating he would be dead in 15 minutes. Then, he proceeded to the waiting car with the two generals, was driven away, and ingested the poison. Within an hour, the Wehrmacht announced that Field Marshal Rommel had succumbed to his injuries. The Führer conveyed his deepest sympathies. It was a complete fabrication, but that fabrication became the Rommel family's safeguard. The Nazis obtained their hero's funeral, their propaganda opportunity, their image of a devoted soldier fallen in service to the Reich. And Lucy and Manfred were able to survive the war's final months without being labeled traitors. Relatives without being pursued, apprehended, or sent to a camp. The very deception that caused Erwin Rommel's death is what preserved his family. And the boy who saw his father depart that morning would spend the remainder of his life contemplating its implications. The teenage deserter Manfred Rommel was not an idle observer during the war. He served as a Luftwaffe auxiliary at 14, assigned to an anti-aircraft battery while still attending school. By early 1945, as the Reich collapsed, he was drafted into the Reich Labor Service, another young life sacrificed to the crumbling front lines. But as April saw Allied armies advance deeper into southern Germany, Manfred made a choice his father couldn't. He deserted. Near Riedlingen, amidst the disintegration of an army, he slipped away from his unit and was swiftly captured by advancing French forces. He became a prisoner of war at 16 years old. What followed profoundly altered everything. During his interrogation, Manfred was brought before General Jean de Lattre de Tassigny himself, a prominent French commander. Instead of remaining silent or repeating the regime's fabricated story, Manfred spoke the truth. He recounted the arrival of the two generals at the family residence, the ultimatum presented, the cyanide capsule, and the staged funeral. For the first time, the actual account of Erwin Rommel's death left the family's confines. This teenager, a deserter, a captive, the son of the war's most celebrated German general, had just provided the Allies with the truth the Nazi regime had so diligently attempted to conceal. And with that action, the Rommel name initiated a transformation nobody could have foreseen. It ceased being the name of a Wehrmacht legend and started evolving into something considerably more intricate, a name associated not with unquestioning loyalty, but with the consequence of defying it and rebuilding from devastation. When the war concluded, Lucy Rommel was left alone with her sorrow and a pension that existed solely because her husband had agreed to perish discreetly. She spent the subsequent decades in southwest Germany, almost entirely avoiding public life. She granted no significant interviews, published no memoirs, and sought no attention. American and British intelligence officers questioned her in the months following the surrender. However, she faced no charges. There was nothing to charge her with. She had been the wife of a soldier in a regime that destroyed her husband, and the state funeral that masked his murder had, ironically, protected her from the retribution that befell other families connected to the Nazi elite. Lucy passed away in 1971 in Stuttgart, largely forgotten by the public. The woman who had stood in the doorway on October 14, 1944 and watched her husband walk to his death, never truly recovered from that moment, but she also never became a symbol of anything. She simply faded into the quiet obscurity of post-war Germany. Manfred pursued a completely different direction. After his release from French captivity, he dedicated himself to reconstruction. Not the old Germany, but the new one. He successfully completed his abitur in 1947 at Biberach an der Riss, enrolled in law studies at the University of Tübingen, and by 1956 had joined the civil service. Gradually, the field marshal's son integrated himself into the very democratic institutions that had supplanted everything his father had fought for. He married Lieselot in 1954 and established the kind of stable, unpretentious career that no one would have expected from a Rommel. He wasn't trying to escape his name, he was subtly redefining it. But what Manfred subsequently did with that name is what no one could have predicted. The son who led Stuttgart. In 1974, Manfred Rommel was elected Oberbürgermeister of Stuttgart, campaigning as a member and modernized its public transit system during 1978, along with investing in global arts centers that greatly improved the city's reputation. His approach to city development was visionary, surpassing most German mayors of his era by decades. More notably, he led a city with a very large population of international residents in West Germany. Instead of viewing immigration as a challenge to be managed, he welcomed it wholeheartedly. He became recognized as one of the country's most immigrant-friendly and progressive politicians. Reflect on that for a moment. The son of Hitler's most celebrated field marshal, a man whose name was synonymous with the Afrika Korps and tank warfare, was successfully managing one of Germany's most multicultural urban areas. He served for 22 years, becoming one of the most beloved local politicians in Germany's history. His distinctive style featured dry, Swabian humor and an almost comical level of thriftiness. Reportedly, he offered guests only half a pretzel without butter at official city gatherings, a practice that amused Stuttgart citizens while embarrassing visiting dignitaries. However, Manfred's popularity wasn't solely based on his charisma. It stemmed from a quiet, unwavering conviction that democratic leadership demanded magnanimity, particularly from those whose families had previously been on the wrong side of historical events. And it was a bond he formed during those years that truly demonstrated how far he would carry that conviction. A relationship that no one anticipated. While serving as mayor, Manfred Rommel developed deep personal connections with two individuals whose last names should have made any association unthinkable. The first was George Patton IV, son of General George S. Patton, the American commander who had pursued Erwin Rommel across North Africa and Sicily. The second was David Montgomery, son of Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, the British officer who ultimately defeated Rommel at El Alamein in 1942. The sons of men who had sought to defeat each other across the deserts of Libya and Tunisia were now friends. They visited each other, appeared at events together, and built authentic connections that went beyond mere diplomatic politeness. For Manfred, these friendships held significant personal meaning and served as symbols. They embodied the type of reconciliation that post-war Europe was intended to represent but seldom achieved on such an intimate level. The wartime animosity between Rommel, Patton, and Montgomery had become a defining element of World War II's narrative. One generation later, their sons transformed that rivalry into an image of a continent that had healed. The Rommel name ceased to be solely linked to the Wehrmacht and instead became, for many, a symbol of progress and moving forward. Yet, Manfred's most impactful moment was still on the horizon, and it had nothing to do with past conflicts. It was a burial that stunned the nation. By 1977, West Germany was engulfed in a severe crisis. The Red Army faction, also known as the Baader-Meinhof Group, had been conducting a campaign of bombings, assassinations, and kidnappings that instilled widespread fear throughout the country. That fall, the crisis reached its zenith. On October 18th, 3 imprisoned leaders of the RAF, Andreas Baader, Gudrun Ensslin, and Jan-Karl Raspe, were discovered deceased in their prison cells at Stammheim prison in Stuttgart. The official conclusion was suicide, although the circumstances of their deaths remained a subject of debate for decades. Germany was deeply divided on how to handle the bodies. No municipality was willing to accept them. The prospect of burying terrorists on German soil ignited fierce opposition from conservative factions, law enforcement authorities, and a significant portion of the public. The bodies remained unclaimed as various cities refused to take responsibility. Then Manfred Rommel stepped forward. As Stuttgart's mayor, he issued an order for the 3 individuals to be interred together at the city's Dornholdenfriedhof cemetery. The public backlash was intense. Conservatives were outraged. His political allies distanced themselves from the decision. Critics accused him of validating terrorism, of showing disrespect to the victims of RAF violence, and of turning Stuttgart into a memorial for murderers. This was arguably the most contentious decision of his career and potentially its end. Manfred's reply was a single, profound principle. After death, all animosity must cease. Consider the weight of that statement, especially coming from him. This was a man whose father had been compelled by his own government to take poison, and was subsequently given a false funeral intended to serve the regime's propaganda objectives. Erwin Rommel was denied a truthful burial. His death was misrepresented to serve a particular agenda. His legacy was manipulated for political expediency. His son had witnessed this happen when he was just 15 years old. Now, 3 decades later, that same son insisted on a dignified burial for individuals whom the majority of Germany viewed as monsters. This was not out of sympathy for their cause. He was a conservative mayor who had strongly condemned the RAF's acts of violence. Rather, it was because he believed that how a society treats its deceased reveals its true nature. A society that denies burial to its perceived enemies is still operating under the same destructive logic that led to his father's demise. That specific moment crystallizes Manfred Rommel's entire life's philosophy, a quiet, lifelong rejection of the destructive forces that shattered his family. However, the Rommel family saga held one more revelation that remained unknown until the year 2000, the secret daughter. For many years, a woman named Gertrude was a regular presence in the Rommel household. Introduced to guests as Cousin Gertrude, she was treated as an extended member of the family, present at gatherings, welcomed into their home, and trusted with private matters. She was by Erwin Rommel's hospital bedside when he was recovering from injuries in 1944. On at least one occasion, she answered the telephone when an irate Adolf Hitler called the house, demanding Rommel's immediate return to North Africa. Yet, Gertrude was not a cousin. She was Erwin Rommel's biological daughter. Born on December 8, 1913, Gertrude was the child of Walburga Stemmer, a young woman Rommel had been involved with while stationed at Weingarten before World War I. Around the year 2000, a collection of over 150 letters surfaced, written by Rommel to Walburga during those early years. In them, he referred to her as his little mouse and spoke of his aspirations to create a small home for her and their child. These letters depicted a relationship filled with genuine affection and tenderness, revealing a side of the disciplined military officer that the public perception had never encompassed. However, the relationship did not endure. Rommel married Lucy Malin in 1916. When Lucy became pregnant with Manfred in 1928, Walburga's situation became untenable, and she passed away that same year. The officially stated cause of death was pneumonia, but it was widely believed, both then and now, that she had taken her own life. Gertrude was then brought into the Rommel household under the guise of being a cousin. She lived her entire life overshadowed by her father's public image. The devoted husband, the family man, the honorable soldier. The letters were eventually passed down to Gertrude's son, Joseph Pan, who brought them to public attention and documented a relationship that the Rommel family had kept secret for almost a century. The carefully crafted image of the loyal family man, the same image that formed the basis of the post-war Rommel narrative, had been concealing a second family all along. This was the myth-making machine at work. This is where the narrative calls for a broader perspective. The Rommel family not only weathered the post-war era but actively shaped how the world remembered Erwin Rommel. In doing so, they played a crucial role in constructing one of the most potent narratives in modern German history. The portrayal of Rommel as the good German general, honorable, chivalrous, apolitical, a man who fought fairly and opposed Hitler from within, became a fundamental element of what historians term the clean Wehrmacht myth. This narrative enabled West Germany to reintegrate former military personnel into democratic society without requiring a full confrontation with the Wehrmacht's actual actions. If Rommel could be seen as an honorable soldier despite serving Hitler, then it suggested that others could be viewed similarly. Lucy and Manfred both contributed to this narrative. They emphasized Erwin's supposed chivalry in North Africa, his detachment from Nazi ideology, and his association with the July 20th plot. They framed him as a man who had been eliminated by the regime precisely because he stood against it. The story was compelling and emotionally resonant, and much of the Western public readily accepted it. However, historians continue to debate the extent to which this portrayal was factual versus strategically crafted self-representation. Rommel had faithfully served the regime for years. He had accepted numerous gifts, promotions, and honors directly from Hitler. His link to the July 20th conspirators was real, but its exact nature remains unclear. He might have been aware of the plot without actively participating. The family meticulously shaped the historical record, selecting which letters to publish, which accounts to share, and which inconvenient truths, like Gertrude's existence, to keep hidden. None of this negates the atrocities committed by the Nazis against Rommel in the end. The forced suicide was a reality. The subsequent cover-up was also real. The profound grief experienced by the family was undeniably genuine. However, the myth that emerged from that grief served purposes that extended far beyond a single family's attempt to process their loss. What the name signifies today. Stuttgart Airport Joseph Pan uncovered this, documenting a secret kept by the Rommel family for nearly a century. The meticulously crafted persona, that of the devoted family man which sustained the post-war Rommel legend, had actually hidden a second family. This myth-making process demands a broader perspective. The Rommel family not only weathered the post-war era, they actively played a part in shaping global perceptions of Erwin Rommel. In doing so, they helped forge one of modern German history's most potent narratives. The portrayal of Rommel as an honorable German general, chivalrous, principled, and apolitical, a man who fought fairly and opposed Hitler internally, became a cornerstone of what scholars term the clean Wehrmacht myth. This narrative enabled West Germany to reintegrate former military officers into its democratic framework without demanding a complete confrontation with the Wehrmacht's actual actions. If Rommel could be seen as an honorable soldier serving under Hitler, then potentially many others could be viewed similarly. Both Lucy and Manfred played a role in creating this narrative. They emphasized Irving's purported chivalry in North Africa, his detachment from Nazi ideology, and his links to the July 20th plot. They presented him as someone the regime murdered because he opposed it. This account resonated strongly and was emotionally satisfying, gaining acceptance from much of the Western public. However, historians continue to debate the accuracy of this portrayal versus its strategic self-promotion. Rommel genuinely served the regime for years, accepting personal gifts, advancements, and honors from Hitler. His involvement with the July 20th conspirators was indeed real, yet uncertain. He might have known about the plot without actively participating. The family influenced the historical record as much as they drew from it, deciding which letters to release, which accounts to share, and which inconvenient truths, such as Gertrude's existence, to keep hidden. None of this diminishes the ultimate fate meted out to Rommel by the Nazis. The coerced suicide was a reality. The subsequent cover-up was also real. The profound grief experienced was genuine. Yet, the legend that emerged from that sorrow served objectives that reached far beyond a single family's struggle to process their loss. This is what the name signifies today. Stuttgart Airport was given the new name Manfred Rommel Flughafen in 2014, just 1 year after Manfred passed away at 84. This honor wasn't for the field marshal, but rather for his son, the mayor. The Rommel name's journey shifted from the harsh North African deserts to a bustling civilian airport in a democratic Germany, a path initiated by a teenager's desertion, a liberal's brave ethical stance, and a family secret kept concealed for nearly 100 years. Each year, numerous travelers pass through this terminal, unaware of the narrative behind the name displayed. On the structure, they remain ignorant of the cyanide capsule, the two generals standing at the main entrance, or the 15-year-old boy observing from the adjacent window. They don't know about his cousin Gertrude, the affectionate letters to a little mouse, or the pretzel snacks served without butter at official city events. The legacy of the field marshal is still a subject of debate, and rightfully so. The notion of a clean Wehrmacht inflicted significant harm, and the Rommel family's part in promoting this idea warrants honest examination. However, his son's legacy is remarkably straightforward. Manfred Rommel dedicated his life to proving something that most families associated with the Third Reich never even tried to achieve: that you can bear a name without inheriting its associated wrongdoings. This is possible if you're prepared to dedicate each day to demonstrating what that name signifies now, rather than merely defending its past meaning. He granted burial with dignity to terrorists because his own father was denied such respect. He formed friendships with the children of former adversaries, understanding that the animosity of war need not be passed down. And he led a diverse, modern city, believing that democracy was more than just a governmental framework. It represented a conscious, daily commitment to surpassing the circumstances of one's origin. Manfred Rommel passed away on November 7, 2013. The airport received its new designation the following year, and the name that once reverberated across the North African battlegrounds now welcomes visitors to one of Europe's most hospitable urban centers. This was a subtle, ultimate transformation that the field marshal likely never envisioned, yet one that his son worked tirelessly his entire life to achieve. We appreciate you watching. If you found this video engaging, explore our other in-depth analyses of the families who played significant roles in World War II. Remember to give us a like, subscribe to our channel, and enable notifications so you don't miss any future uploads.